He saved an alien princess as a teen. Years later, she asked him to return. Asterisk, the night was quiet and cool, and the moon was bright in the sky above the town of Fairview, where not much ever happened and nothing exciting was ever expected, but something strange was about to change everything for a boy named Jason. Jason was 16 years old, and he lived on the edge of the town near the woods where he liked to walk with his dog Max every night after dinner, and that night was no different or so. He thought he had just reached the start of the forest trail when he saw something flash across the sky like a burning star with a long white tail, and it moved too fast and too low to be a plane, and it made a deep humming sound that shook the trees as it passed. Jason stopped and watched with wide eyes as the bright object dropped lower and lower until it vanished behind the hills near the old quarry, and then came a loud boom and a flash of blue light that lit up the trees like daylight. For a second, and then it was Goonmox barked and pulled at the leash, and Jason felt his heart beating faster than ever before because he knew that whatever had fallen was not normal, and he had to go see what it was. He followed the noise down the narrow trail deeper into the woods, and the trees were tall and dark around him, and he had to move fast to keep up with Max, who kept sniffing the ground and running ahead. As if he already knew the way. The deeper they went, the stranger it felt, and the air smelled like burnt metal and smoke, and Jason's skin tingled as if something was not right with the world around him, and still he kept going because curiosity was stronger than fear. After 10 more minutes of walking, he saw a soft glow behind a group of trees, and when he stepped closer, he could not believe what he saw there in a small clearing was a crashed object. Not a plane, not a car, not anything he had ever seen before, and it was shaped like a teardrop made of shining silver, metal and glowing with a soft blue light like a living thing. The ship was half buried in the earth, with smoke rising from cracks, and strange symbols marked the sides like letters from another world, and the air buzzed like electricity, and Max whimpered and hid behind Jason's legs. Jason felt his hands shake as he stepped closer, and the door on the side of the ship opened with a slow hiss, and out came a sound like whispering wind and cold air. Rushed past him inside, was dark at first, but then a soft pink light turned on, and Jason took one step forward and looked inside. What he saw made him stop breathing for a second. There, lying on the floor, was a girl with glowing silver skin, long white hair, and bright violet eyes that blinked slowly, like she was waking from a long sleep, and she looked young, maybe his age or a little older, and she was clearly not human. Jason froze and his thoughts ran wild, but something inside him told him she was not dangerous and that she needed help, and right now he was the only person who could give it. The girl tried to sit up but winced in pain, and Jason rushed to her side and held out his hands, slowly to show he meant no harm, and she looked at him with eyes full of pain and fear, but also hope. She spoke in a soft voice, and the words were not English, but somehow Jason could understand them in his mind, like they were translated without sound, and she said, "Please help me, they are coming, and I cannot move." Jason nodded and looked around the ship for anything that could help her, and found a thin blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. Then he gently helped her out of the broken ship and into the cold night. He knew he could not take her to a hospital or the police because no one would believe him, and they might hurt her or lock her away. So he made a quick choice. He would hide her in his old treehouse in the woods behind his backyard, the place where he used to play when he was a kid, and no one ever went there anymore, not even Max. He picked her up slowly and carefully, and she was light as a feather, and her skin was warm like sunlight, and she rested her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes again. Jason walked all the way back through the woods, heart pounding, legs shaking, carrying a real alien girl in his arms, while the stars above seemed to watch in silence, and the wind whispered secrets only he could hear. That night would change his life forever, and though he did not know it yet, it was only the beginning of something far bigger than himself, something from the stars, something that would return one day. He reached the edge of the woods and looked up at the sky and whispered softly, "I've got you. I won't let anything happen to you." And the stars did not answer, but he felt something in his heart that told him they had heard. Asterisk. The treehouse was old, but strong and hidden between the tallest branches behind Jason's backyard, where no one ever went anymore, and it had once been his childhood fort, where he dreamed of space and monsters and heroes, but now it had become something else, something far more real. Jason placed the alien girl gently on the wooden floor covered with an old sleeping bag and some dusty pillows, and Max stood nearby watching. With wide eyes and quiet ears, like he understood something strange had happened, something important. Lay still for a while, her silver skin glowing faintly in the dark and her breath
soft
like wind through leaves, and Jason watched her worried. Unsure of what to do next, but determined not to leave her alone, the girl opened her eyes slowly and looked around the small wooden space. Her eyes full of confusion and fear, and Jason held out his hands again to show he meant no harm and said quietly, "It's okay, you're safe here. I won't let anyone find you." She tried to speak, but her voice was weak and her body trembled like she had no energy left, and Jason reached into his backpack and pulled out a water bottle and an old granola bar and handed them to her, hoping she could eat and drink. She took the water with shaky hands and sipped slowly, then took a small bite of the food, and Jason saw the color in her skin brighten just a little, as if strength was coming back drop by drop. He asked her name, and she touched her chest and whispered, "Elira." And when she spoke his name in return, it sent a strange feeling through his chest, like music that only he could. Here Jason nodded and said, "I'm Jason, and I'm going to help you no matter what." And even though he didn't understand everything, he knew this was the right thing to do. That night he stayed with her in the treehouse, covering her with old blankets and checking the windows for any signs of movement in the woods. Because she had said someone was coming, someone dangerous, and Jason believed her complete. Laura told him, through soft words and strange images that floated into his mind, that she was running from enemies who wanted her dead, enemies who would destroy anything to find her. And Jason's stomach turned when he imagined what would happen if they came to Earth. The next morning, Jason woke early and snuck back into the house, where he packed a small bag with supplies, food, batteries, flashlights, and a first aid kit, and told his parents he was going camping with a friend for a few days, which was not too unusual for him. He returned to the treehouse and found Elira awake, sitting quietly with Max lying beside her like a guard, and she looked at Jason with tired eyes, but also with something new in them, something like trust. Over the next few days, they worked together in secret, and Jason learned more about her and her world and the broken ship deep in the forest where no one dared to go now, because he had spread a story about wild dogs to keep others away. Every night he brought parts from his dad's garage, wires and circuits and batteries, anything he thought might help, and Elira would take them and carefully connect them to a strange device made of silver and glass, with lights that blinked and pulsed like stars. She explained in simple thoughts that this was a signal beacon, a way to call her people for help, but it needed more power, more time, and more protection, because if it fell into the wrong hands, everything would be lost. Jason helped her every step of the way, running between the treehouse and the crash site at night, hiding the tools and food inside hollow logs and old backpacks so no one would notice. And each time he looked up at the sky, wondering if her people were listening, yet they talked more and more, and Elira told him about her home. A planet with oceans of light and skies that changed color with emotion, and cities that floated in the air, and trees that sang during storms. And Jason listened with wide eyes like a child hearing bedtime stories for the first time. But these stories were not fiction. They were memories, real and full of joy and sadness. And Jason began to feel something grow inside him, something like hope, but also something like fear, because he knew she would not stay forever. One evening, while working on the beacon, a strange wind swept through the forest, and Elira suddenly froze, her eyes wide and shining, and she whispered, "They are near. They found me," and Jason felt a chill run down his spine. Grabbed the tools and hid them fast, and they hurried back to the treehouse, where he pulled up the rope ladder and covered the windows and sat beside her, heart pounding and breath shallow, listening to every sound in the dark. Elira took his hand and held it tightly, her fingers warm and soft, and she said, "Thank you," not with words, but with a look that said everything. And Jason nodded, not knowing what to say, but meaning every silent word. He would protect her no matter what. He would keep her safe, because that was what heroes did, even if no one ever knew, even if the danger was bigger than he could understand. The stars above twinkled through the trees like distant eyes watching their secret, and Jason held his breath as the night grew colder and the forest grew quiet again. waiting for whatever would come next. The wind was cold and sharp as it moved through the trees that night, and the forest felt different, as if it was holding its breath. And even the leaves seemed afraid to move, and Jason could feel something wrong deep in his chest, like a warning. That came from the stars inside the treehouse. Alira sat with her knees pulled close, her silver skin dim, and her eyes glowing faint like dying fire, and Max curled up beside her, his ears twitching with every sound, and Jason sat near the window watching, and waiting for something he could not see. Then came the sound that changed everything, a low humming that moved through the ground. Like a beast breathing under the soil, and Jason grabbed the old binoculars and looked toward the direction of the crash site, and what he saw made his hands go cold. There were shadows moving, not like animals, not like people, but something else, tall and smooth and silent. They floated just above the ground with long arms and heads like smooth stones, and their eyes glowed red in the dark, and Jason knew at once these were the ones Alira feared. He turned back to her and said softly, "They are here." And she nodded with a face full of sadness and strength, and she stood slowly, her body still weak but her mind clear and sharp, and she looked toward the stars through the window and whispered something in her own language. Jason helped her down from the treehouse, careful and fast, and together they ran through the woods, avoiding the trails, staying in the dark, moving like ghosts between trees and shadows, and Max led the way with his nose low and ears high like a soldier on a mission. They reached the crash site just as the sky began to change color from deep blue to silver, and the enemy shadows were close now, their red eyes scanning the woods and the ground around them, burning small holes wherever they looked. And Lyra flinched with every flash. Jason pulled open the hatch of the broken ship and helped Alira inside, and she moved quickly to the beacon, touching its surface with her palm, and it began to glow with a brighter light, stronger than before, and Jason stepped back as a soft hum filled the air. The beacon rose into the air, floating above the ship like a sun made of crystal. And Alira whispered a few words, and the glow pulsed, once, twice, 3 times, and then sent out a wave of light that spread across the forest, like a silent scream far above the earth. Something answered a distant sound, a voice from the stars, a ship, older and faster than anything on Earth, began to move through space, heading for the signal, heading for her. The shadows were closer now, and Jason could see them through the trees, their red eyes burning holes in the dark, and one of them lifted a long silver staff that crackled with blue fire and pointed it toward the ship. Jason jumped in front of Alira, arms wide, heart racing, and shouted, "Go! Now do it now!" And the staff fired a blast of light that missed him by inches and hit a tree behind him, turning it into dust and ash. Alira placed her hands on a small console inside the ship, and it opened a glowing circle on the ground. A teleport gate, a bridge to somewhere else, and she turned to Jason, her face full of sorrow and hope and courage. All at once she reached out and took his hand and said words he would never forget, even though he never heard them with his ears. "You are brave more than you know, and kind more than the stars could ever imagine, but you are still growing, and I cannot ask you to follow me now, not yet, but when you are ready, when you are stronger, come find me, and I will be waiting." Jason wanted to speak, but his throat was tight and his eyes full of tears, and all he could do was nod as the light around her grew brighter, and the gate began to spin with energy that hummed like music from another world. She let go of his hand, stepped into the light, and vanished. Ship shook, and the beacon vanished into the sky like a falling star in reverse, and Jason was left alone in the clearing with Max and the burned tree and the silence of the woods. He fell to his knees and looked up at the sky and whispered her name again and again, hoping she could still hear him wherever she had gone. The shadows disappeared, with the rising sun like smoke blown away by wind, and Jason knew they would not come back, not yet, because she was gone and the signal was complete. He stood slowly, dusted off his jacket, and picked up the broken bracelet she had dropped, a small silver ring with her royal symbol glowing faintly in the palm of his hand. He held it close and promised quietly, not just with words, but with his heart and his soul and everything inside him, that one day he would find her again, no matter how far. No matter how long, and above him the stars watched in silence as if they, too, were waiting for the day he would return to them. The morning after Alira vanished, the forest felt empty and too quiet, as if the earth itself had paused and was waiting for something to return, and Jason stood in the same clearing where her ship had once rested. Now just a patch of scorched ground and fallen leaves that held the last whispers of another world. He walked home slowly with Max beside him, the bracelet clutched in his hand and questions spinning in his mind like stars caught in a storm, and when he stepped inside his house it felt too small to normal, too real for what he had just seen, and done. Jason never told anyone, not his parents, not his teachers, not even his best friend, because he knew they would never believe him, and maybe part of him wanted to keep it all for himself. A memory too special and too strange to explain with simple words, he hid the bracelet in a small wooden box under his bed, wrapped in cloth, and every night before sleep he would open the box and stare at the glowing mark in the center. The royal symbol of a girl who was no longer here, but who had promised to wait. Time moved forward like a slow river pulling Jason along through school and into college and through part-time jobs and long nights of quiet thinking, and though life looked normal on the outside, inside him there was always a quiet voice calling him to the stars. He read everything he could find about space and planets and strange sightings and hidden messages, and he learned about astronomy and physics and built small radios that searched the sky for signals, hoping that one day he would hear her again. People around him changed, made new friends, found love, chased careers, but Jason stayed the same, steady and focused and always waiting, because deep in his heart he knew the story was not over. Not yet. Years passed like leaves falling one by one, and Jason grew taller, stronger, quieter, and his eyes looked older than his age, and his hands worked with tools and machines like they were part of him. And even Max, though slower still, followed him wherever he went. On his 24th birthday, Jason sat alone in the garage, the air thick with the smell of oil and metal and the soft hum of machines he had built with care and purpose, and in front of him sat a small receiver, made from parts no one could name. It had never made a sound, not once in all the years he had kept it alive, checking and adjusting and waiting. But that night, as the stars rose high above the trees, the machine blinked once, then twice, then let out a soft chirp that made Jason's heart stop. He leaned in, saw the message appear on the tiny screen symbols, glowing in a pattern he had only seen once before, and his hands shook as he reached for the decoder program he had written years ago, when hope still burned bright. The message was short but powerful, 3 words, written in perfect English: Jason. Come now. For a long moment he sat frozen, staring at the screen, while 1,000 memories returned all at once. The crash, the forest, the treehouse, the shadows, the light in her eyes, the promise she made, and the one he gave in return. He stood slowly and opened the old box under his bed and held the bracelet in his hand, and this time the symbol glowed brighter than ever before, as if it too had waited for this moment. Jason packed a small bag with tools, food, water, and the bracelet, and he left. A note for his parents saying he was going on a short trip, nothing unusual, nothing strange, and then he walked out into the night toward the old trail he had not taken in years. The forest had changed trees, older paths hidden by vines and roots, but his feet remembered every step, and Max, now old but loyal, followed slowly behind his breath, deep and steady like a drumbeat guiding them both. The edge of the forest near the place where the ship had once fallen, Jason saw something he could not explain, a soft blue light rising from the ground where nothing should be, and as he stepped closer he saw a small silver object half buried in the dirt like a gift from the stars. He reached out and touched it, and the object came to life, rising into the air and unfolding into a shape he recognized, a small personal craft designed not by human hands, but by someone who had once told him to return when he was ready. The ship opened with a gentle hiss, and inside was a seat shaped just for him and a control panel that lit up when he placed the bracelet near it, and the ship hummed like it had been sleeping and was now waking. Just for him, Jason sat down, heart racing and eyes wide, and the ship closed around him, not like a trap, but like a warm shelter, and then the engines lit with silent fire, and the forest below faded into mist as the ship lifted higher and wired through the window. He saw the stars above, no longer distant, no longer silent, and somewhere out there beyond the darkness, a voice was waiting, a promise was still alive, and Jason whispered back across the vast sky, "I'm coming." The stars outside the window were endless and bright, and Jason sat still inside the small alien ship, watching them pass like glowing rivers in the sky, and every second felt like a heartbeat echoing in the dark, a song older than Earth and filled with quiet meaning. The ship moved without sound through the black sea of space, guided not by buttons or screens, but by his thoughts. And the connection between the bracelet and the ship was clear and deep, like they knew each other, like they had waited for this moment, just as he had. Jason looked down at the bracelet resting on his wrist, now pulsing with soft blue light as if it was alive, and the royal symbol glowed like a star carved into silver, and every time it blinked he felt something warm and strong, like a message being whispered into his soul. He did not know how long he had been traveling through space, 'cause time here felt different, slower and faster all at once, and sleep came like gentle waves, and dreams brought visions of her Alira standing beneath strange skies, calling his name without words, but with hope sometimes. The ship showed him places not through windows, but through glowing panels. Pictures of planets and cities and stars, and once it showed him a great moon with blue oceans floating around it, and towers made of crystal that sang when the wind touched them, and Jason knew this was her world. He reached out and touched the image, and the ship responded, turning slightly, shifting its path as if it too felt the same pull, the same longing to return to the place where everything had started and where everything would begin again. Then came the sound, a deep hum that rose through the floor of the ship and into his bones, not loud, not harsh, but steady like a drum calling from far away. And Jason sat up as the panels lit up with new symbols and colors he had never seen before, though. Message came not through sound, but through feeling and light, and the words formed in his mind clear and strong. "Welcome, Jason. Your return has been seen. Your presence is known. Your path is clear. She is waiting." Jason held his breath as the ship moved faster, stars bending around it like water around a stone, and then the darkness began to break, and ahead he saw it, a giant planet with rings of gold and light spinning gently, and beside it a smaller moon glowing like a pearl in the black. The ship slowed as it approached, and Jason could see cities across the moon like threads of silver and light, and tall towers reaching toward space, and ships moving in smooth lines between them like birds in a sky that had no end days. They came closer. The ship sent one more message into his thoughts. "She waits on the sky garden above the core temple. Come with heart open and mind ready for the path ahead." The ship landed without noise on a soft white platform, surrounded by strange trees with glowing leaves and flowers that moved with the wind, and Jason stepped out slowly, his legs shaking slightly from the long journey and the strange gravity of this new place. He looked around and saw people, not human, but close, with silver skin and bright eyes, wearing long robes that shimmered with soft color, and they all looked at him not with fear or anger, but with quiet respect, as if they knew him, as if they had been told about him long ago. Tall figure stepped forward and bowed slightly, then raised a hand and motioned for Jason to follow, and without speaking they walked through a path of light that led up toward a great tower with walls made of crystal and a top that touched the sky. Inside the tower the air was cool and full of music, though no instruments could be seen, and Jason felt a calm come over him, like being wrapped in memories of summer and starlight. And then the doors ahead opened, and there she was, Alira, stood in the center of a wide room filled with light and color, and as Jason stepped inside, she turned and smiled, and the years fell away in that single moment. She walked toward him slowly, her eyes bright and full of something that needed no words, and Jason felt tears rise in his eyes, not from sadness, but from something else, something deeper, something like joy. She reached out and touched the bracelet, and it glowed bright blue, and then she placed her hand on his heart and whispered, "You came?" And he nodded, unable to speak as his voice was lost in the emotion of the stars and the silence. Between them, behind her, the walls showed pictures of Earth, of the treehouse, of Max of the forest, and Jason understood. She had watched, she had remembered, she had waited. Alira took his hand and said, "You have grown, and the light in you has not faded. You came back stronger, just as I knew you would." And Jason finally found his voice and said, "I never stopped thinking about you. I never forgot the promise." She smiled again and led him to the edge of the room, where the sky opened before them and the stars stretched wide and endless. And she said, "Your journey is only beginning, and now we walk it together." And for the first time, Jason felt like he was home. The stars above were quiet and endless, and Jason stood beside Alira on the sky platform, watching them sparkle like dust in the dark, and the wind moved gently through the silver trees around them, carrying soft sounds that felt like music made of memory. He looked at her face, now older than before, yet somehow still the same, and saw strength and sorrow and peace all living together in her eyes, and he knew that the years had not broken her, but shaped her into someone more powerful than she had ever been before. Alira turned to him with a soft smile and said, "Without speaking, we have waited for this day, since the moment you helped me, and now you are ready to see what lies beyond what you know, and to step into a life that was always meant to be yours." Jason felt her words in his chest like warm light, and he nodded, slowly, unsure of what would come next, but certain that he would follow her anywhere, because something deep inside him told him he was no longer just a visitor in this world, but a part of it. They walked together through the shining corridors of the core temple. Her walls glowed softly with memories, and colors shifted with every step, as if the building itself was alive and watching and remembering, and Jason could feel the hum of history in the floor beneath his feet. Other beings passed them, tall and graceful, with robes that shimmered like starlight, and each one gave a small bow or a nod of respect as they passed, and Jason wondered how they knew him and why they honored him as if he had already earned their trust. Alira led him into a room filled with floating lights and circles of energy, and in the center stood a tall silver platform surrounded by mirrors. They reflected not their faces, but their pasts, their choices, their fears, and their hopes, and Jason stepped onto it without hesitation. The mirrors lit up, showing him images of the forest of Max of the night. He carried her in his arms, of the old treehouse of lonely years spent searching for signals in the stars, and of the moment the message arrived on his 24th birth. Alira stood beside him and touched one of the mirrors, and it changed, showing a future not yet lived, where Jason stood among other humans and alien allies, facing something large and dark in the distance. And Jason felt a shiver, not from fear but from understanding. She said, "This is what waits. This is what grows in the far reaches of the stars, a danger older than time and colder than space itself. And it is coming not just for us, but for all who carry light and hope in you. Jason, you were chosen not by accident, but by the universe itself." Jason took a deep breath and felt the truth of her words in the air and in his bones, and though he did not understand it all, he knew that his path was not just about finding her, but about becoming something greater than he had ever dreamed. The lights in the room shifted, and a suit of armor formed in the air, sleek and light, with the same symbol as his bracelet glowing in the center, and Jason reached out and let it cover him, not like a cage, but like a promise. A second skin made of purpose here, placed a small device in his hand shaped like a star, and it pulsed once and then vanished into his palm. And she said, "This is your key, your guide, and your bond to us, and it will lead you to where you are needed most when the time comes." They left the temple together and walked toward a tall ship resting on a glowing dock, its shape like a winged flame, and its surface shifting with every light that touched it. And Jason knew without question that this ship was now his. Ramp lowered with a soft hum, and Alira stepped aside, letting him walk first, and he turned to look at her one more time and asked, "Will I see you again?" And she smiled and replied, "We will not be far from each other ever again, no matter how wide the stars." Jason stepped inside the ship, and the walls greeted him with warmth and light, and a voice that felt familiar and kind said, "Welcome, Commander," and the engines stirred beneath him, ready to rise, ready to fly. The ship lifted from the dock. Alira raised her hand, and Jason pressed his palm against the window, and they watched each other until the moon became small behind him and the stars opened wide ahead. He looked forward to where the danger waited and where the future called, and he felt no fear, only fire and faith, and something he had never fully known before, belonging. The stars were no longer a mystery or a dream. They were his road, his mission, and his homeland. With that, Jason returned to the stars, not as a boy who once saved an alien girl, but as a man who would help save the galaxy. The stars moved in silence around the ship as it soared through space, and Jason stood near the front window, watching them flow like rivers of fire and ice. And though he had no map and no clear path, he knew in his heart that he was exactly where. He needed 2 bidets turned into weeks, and Jason trained every moment learning the language of the stars and the movement of distant ships and the ways of the people, who had once only lived in dreams and stories, and the ship itself taught him. With light and sound and memory, he learned to move like the wind and strike like fire and think like the night sky, quiet but full of strength and truth, and soon he was not just a traveler or a visitor, but something more, something stronger, a protector. With purpose, messages came from Alira, sometimes only short and silent flashes of thought across space, but always filled with warmth and calm, and every time he felt her voice in his mind, he remembered the night in the forest, the glow of her eyes, and the promise made beneath the trees. Then came the call, a signal from a distant moon, where a new danger had risen, where shadows moved again in the dark, and where old enemies had turned seeking power once lost, and Jason knew without doubt that this was the moment his journey had prepared him for. He arrived in silence, as the ship landing on black stone near a ruined temple, where the stars above looked dim, and the air felt cold and heavy, and the wind carried the sound of fear and warning. And he stepped out wearing the armor given to him by Alira and the elders. People of the moon gathered to watch his arrival, and though they did not speak, they looked at him with eyes full of hope and memory, as if they too had waited for the one who came from Earth with a heart that never gave up. Jason moved through the broken paths toward the temple at the center, and there he found them, the same shadow beings he had once seen in the forest, tall and cold, with red eyes and smooth armor that shimmered like smoke, and they turned to him with slow, steady steps. But Jason did not run, and he did not fear. He reached into his memory, into the fire that lived within him, and he called on the training, the promise, the strength that had grown with every mile across the stars, and he stood tall and still like a mountain of light. Battle was short but fierce, a storm of fire and wind and energy that shook the ground and split the sky, and Jason moved through it all like a blade through water, fast and silent and sharp. And when the last shadow fell, the wind changed, and the moon breathed again. Alira arrived in a golden ship that descended like the sun through clouds, and she stepped out wearing armor of white and silver, her hair flowing like light, and her eyes locked on Jason with pride and something more, something deep and strong and quiet. They met at the center of the temple where stone and sky met, and she reached out and touched his shoulder and said through thought and feeling, "You have become more than I ever dreamed, and the stars themselves have seen your light." Jason looked into her eyes and said, "I did not come this far to be a hero. I came because of you and the promise we made, and because I believe there is more good left in the universe than fear, and more hope than shadow." She smiled and took his hand, and together they stood in the light of the new dawn, as the people of the moon began to gather and sing a song of return, a song of safety, a song of 2 souls who met long ago under strange skies and kept a promise that no force could break in. The days that followed, Jason and Alira worked together, building peace, teaching strength, guiding new warriors and dreamers who would one day take their place and rise to face the unknown, not with fear but with courage born from kindness. They traveled from world to world, solving problems, stopping war, spreading knowledge, and always moving like light through the dark. And everywhere they went, people spoke of the princess and the warrior, the girl from the stars and the boy from Earth who came back when it mattered most. Years passed and legends grew, but Jason never forgot the forest, the treehouse, the cold night when he first saw the broken ship and the girl with violet eyes who changed everything with a single look and a single word. Sometimes, when the night was quiet and the stars above were still, he would sit beside Alira near the window of their ship, and they would look out together hand in hand and say nothing, because silence was enough for theirs was a story not just of battle or distance or alien worlds, but of a bond that crossed time and space and fear and became something eternal, something written in Starlight's something remembered forever, and so the boy who once saved an alien girl became the warrior who helped save the stars, and the princess who once needed rescue became the queen, who led with wisdom and love, and beside her always stood the one who never let go of the promise.